Hello and welcome to tonight's panel discussion on class and opportunity in British theatre as part of the North Wales Alchemy Festival. A huge thank you to Stage Text for working with us this evening. Closed captioning is available for this discussion and the option to access this is at the bottom of your screen. So I'll talk to you for just a couple of minutes and then I will hand over to our panel. My name is Ria Parry and I am one of the co-directors at the North Wales Arts Centre in Oxford. And one of the main big things that we do at the North Wales is called Arts Lab. Our Arts Lab programme is created to work with early career artists across the UK. And that is about supporting those early career artists through space and workshops and mentorship, setting up collaborations, and very importantly, attempting to connect those early career artists to paid creative work. The Alchemy Festival is the North Wales New Work Festival, and it's our opportunity to showcase work by early career artists from our Arts Lab programme and also our creative associates. It's normally a 3-day in-person event at the Arts Centre, but this year we've gone fully digital and embraced that totally. There is a wonderful programme of work online at the moment, which you can access. It's filled with audio plays and podcasts, some shows and short films. And this year we have also kept one of our favourite festival elements, which is listening to brilliant people discuss topics that we believe are vital to the future of the theatre industry. Tonight's discussion will last around an hour, and although we won't have time for in-person questions from attendees, we have been receiving some questions in advance, and those questions have been fed to the chair, who will feed them in if at all possible. So before I move to the panel, I would like to thank our partner at Oxford University, John Livesey, who represents the Cameron Mackintosh Fund for Contemporary Drama. We've very much enjoyed working with John to deliver this panel series, and I'll now hand over to John to say a few words.
Thank you, Ria. So my name is John Livesey and I am the current drama officer at the University of Oxford. I oversee all drama activity on campus and work alongside local theatres on productions, projects and special events like tonight. In 1990, the university received an endowment from the Mackintosh Foundation to create the Cameron Mackintosh Drama Fund. We are very grateful for the continued support of the foundation, and I am thrilled to represent the CMDF tonight. It's been a pleasure to work with the North Wales on these events, and I am looking forward to listening to the conversation between our fantastic guests tonight.
Thanks so much, John. So without further ado, I will hand over to our panelists. Let me introduce Lyn Gardner, who will be chairing this evening's discussion, Matthew Dunster, Matthew Xia, and Neil Griffiths.
Gosh, I seem to be having a technical problem just at the moment. Now getting to be seen.
I think we've nearly got you.
Hang on. Oh, gosh. Ah, here we are. Hello, everyone.
Very lovely.
Gosh, these are the pleasures of Zoom, aren't they? These, absolutely nerve-tingling moments where you go, it's all going to go wrong. But anyway, thank you very much, Ria. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Brilliant. Over to you, Lyn. Thank you.
Okay. Right, hello everybody. I'm really delighted to see you all here today. As Ria said, we have 3 really excellent panelists. And without further ado, what I'm going to do is to ask them, why are you here tonight? Why are you sitting in the seat that you're sitting in? And also, why do you do the jobs that you currently do, and what was your personal journeys to this point, and what part has class played in that journey? Neil Griffiths, would you like to begin?
Gosh, that's a big one. So I am co-founder and chief exec of Arts Emergency, which is a national charity supporting young people who want to contribute to the culture in which they live. I I've had a few jobs on the way here, but actually I've always been an activist and an organizer. So I did a lot of things off my own back at university and in my sort of early 20s. I studied the arts and ended up working with a lot of comedians and journalists, organizing events and fundraisers for workers' rights campaigns in Southeast Asia. And Arts Emergency was born of that. So I suppose I'm sitting here because I am in a unique position as someone who's been concerned with social justice for 20 years now, to appreciate the importance of the arts and culture and who makes arts and culture in terms of its impact on our everyday life. In terms of class, I am from a working class background. The estate I grew up on, the school I went to, I was one of 3 people that went to university, and I was the first person in my family to go to university. And I also saw the impact that me going to university to study something as outrageously frivolous as English literature and politics and had an effect on my younger brother and my peers as well. So I also appreciate, you know, the importance of personal progression in these fields. So that's as pithy as I can go in terms of my journey, I think.
Okay, that's great. And has class ever felt an obstacle to you?
Yeah. I mean, to check my privilege, there's not many things that disadvantage me in the world, but there are rarefied rooms that I do go in as part of my work now, as part of my work previously as a fundraiser for mainstream charities, where it is, you know, there's pressure to code switch or assimilate, and minor differences are drawn out, even for me as a straight white, now middle class man, cisgendered and very confident usually, you know. So yeah, there is an aspect for sure. Yeah.
Matthew, Dunster, what about you?
Well, I remember speaking to the sociologist Sam Friedman, and he said that nearly every story of social mobility, and mine is a story of social mobility, begins with, there was this one teacher. And for me, that is absolutely the case. There were situations in the environment that I was growing up in the sort of working class community that I grew up in, that I was born into, that had got me in some compromising, difficult situations around the age of 14, 15. And at exactly that point, my English teacher said, "Do you want to be in this school play?" Which was Kes. And the combination of having that opportunity at that moment gave me a kind of lifeline that I've been clutching onto ever since, and actually trying to offer that same lifeline when I've had the opportunity. I sort of messed up my O levels, but they let me stay on. I messed up my A levels, and then I went to work in debt recovery for Northwest Water for 3 years. And after 3 years, your A level results don't matter. So I went to do drama at Bretton Hall. And then what I always think is a really important part of that story, again, as I'm sure might be the same for certainly for Neil, I was the first person in my family to go to university. When I left university, this was why I feel looking at class within the arts in isolation is really troublesome, because we have to look at the kind of whole sort of social structure. I benefited from Margaret Thatcher. I'm that old, in that when I went to university, all my fees were paid because it was means tested and based on my parents' income. And I got a full grant to support my living costs from 91 to 94. When I moved to London in 95, signing on was so easy. I signed on, got my door within a week, got my housing benefit paid in full on my flat, signed off when I got an acting job, signed back on. So the system allowed me to remain focused on my creativity and just take the opportunities that could progress me. Those days have gone, you know, so I feel very, very lucky to have sort of moved to London and emerged into the industry when I did. In terms of being aware of class as an obstacle, because I started as an actor, I don't think I ever thought about class, because I was only ever asked to play people from Oldham, basically. I was only ever asked to play working class characters. And they seem to be coming along regularly enough for me to sustain a living. I guess I noticed a difference when I became a director, but that was more about then being able to see from the inside the culture of buildings, the culture of arts organisations. And from within those institutions, I do feel that I recognise that my progress had been slower, and that there were, and interestingly, the further I got up within those institutions, the more uncomfortable I felt, because there were less and less people who spoke like me.
That's really interesting, Matthew. Let's come back to that, and I think some of the things that you've raised there, because I think one of the things that's quite interesting about this discussion is about the fact that it seems to me that, you know, to some degree, the class has tended to be one of those areas that we've not really talked about in theatre, and yet it absolutely permeates actually the way theatre is run. Matthew Xia, what about you? How have you got to this point of sitting here tonight, and how has class affected that?
Yeah, again, massively unaware of class until a particular point in my life. So I guess the bit before I become aware of it is I grew up in relative poverty with a single mother. I'm envious of people who are working class, because I don't think many people in my family were working. I often use the phrase benefit class, criminal class, but I think these are unhelpful terms. I think my mum was a survivor, and she did what she needed to do to make sure that the rent was paid and there was food on the table. So when I hear people talking about kind of university and jobs and kind of a steady life, whatever that means, I kind of wish I had that. Similar to Matthew, I guess some really important teachers in probably when I was around the age of 11, suggested that I wander down to the local theatre, which was Theatre Royal Stratford East. And again, I remained ignorant, because that place is like a unicorn. It's like no other theatre in the country, I don't think. You know, when I walked into it, it was run by Philip Headley, who, yes, was middle class, certainly by that point, but almost every other staff member was working class and spoke like me. So Clint Dyer was there, Dawn Reed was there, sorry. And it was this magical incubator where we were just empowered and enfranchised and given platforms and voices. It was when I left Stratford East around the age of probably 28, 29, and started discovering theatres like Hampstead and the Young Vic, that it had a big effect on me. I hadn't noticed how much of an effect it had on me, but I was suddenly wearing cravats and funny hats and skinny jeans and this huge assimilation. I remember my mum saying to me, I think it was the first time I was ever on Radio 4, "You were talking for 20 minutes before I knew it was you," because I'd changed the way I was speaking to speak like the people who were speaking to me. And it permeates, you know. How has it affected me? Assimilation continues, huge doubt. And then I guess because of intersectionality, I can never quite work out why I didn't get that job, why I didn't get that opportunity. Is it my race? Is it my class? Is it my lack of educational attainment? So I'm often looking at the kind of gulf that I see between me and other people. So yeah, I think that's where I am. And why am I here? I think I'm here because I'm fascinated by how we create more opportunity for more people.
But do you think, Matthew, that actually that class kind of, in a sense, is the unacknowledged elephant in the room? I'm thinking not long ago reading a piece, and the playwright Sabrina Mahfouz, and she was talking about that when people talked to her about the kind of obstacles of being a woman in the arts, you know, that she said, but you know, people talk about my gender, people talk actually about race, but what they never talk about is class. And I can remember, oh gosh, you know, maybe 12, 15 years ago, having a conversation with Lisa Goldman, who was then, I think, running Soho Theatre. And we were having a conversation about gender, and she turned around and said to me, listen, you know, I think this is a kind of a sideshow, really, when we talk about gender, because actually the thing that we never talk about is class. And my question really is why? Why is that? Is it just because in the UK we are rubbish at talking about class, or is it something very particular about the arts that we haven't recognised it? Or is it to do with institutions and to do with the fact that in institutions you can you tend to collect data about race, about gender, whether that's of audiences or of artists, but it's much harder to collect that about socioeconomic background. Why is it, and has something changed? Like, I suppose what I'm really interested is, it seems to me, I wonder whether something has shifted, and in the last 20 years, actually the situation has got worse and worse and worse. And let's say you, Matthew Dunster, that actually your journey, if you were starting out now, or had started out 10 years ago, might have been far harder than it was when you started out in the Thatcher years.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't, if someone had told me there was a £50,000 debt ahead of me, I just wouldn't. And my parents, who did have a certain amount of control over me and my thoughts, they wouldn't have countenanced me taking on that kind of debt. But, I mean, that was, there's a lot to say to the various things you've said, Lyn. I mean, just in terms of data, I always find it really frustrating that we are asked to determine our own ethnicity. We're asked to determine our own gender. And then we're asked, I think, rather pernicious questions about what did your dad do? You know, and what did your mum do? And then somebody else makes the decision about what our class is. That infuriates me. And I think it's really unfair. I think working class people and benefits class and non-class people, I think we talk about class all the time. But it's where we're allowed to talk about them. If you want to know what I think that if we really talk about class within institutions, the establishment know that's the subject where they have the most to lose. So that's why, and I think it's connected to my slight frustration. I don't mean that critically. We had to have a starting point, but the opportunities are somehow meted out to people in need. But who makes the decision about where those opportunities are given out? Seems to me that it's nearly always incredibly reactive and short-termist. So whoever they see as an underrepresented group, whoever's making the most noise, gets that year's set of opportunities.
That is a fundamental issue for me too. Yeah, I think I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but this really speaks to when I was setting Arts Emergency up 10 years ago and looking into academia, which is a good correlation with the arts, and the kind of criteria that they would focus their funding efforts on. Oh, this year we need to help people of colour. Next year it's white working class boys, as if being white adds anything to your disadvantage. And it's completely arbitrary. And to single out class, which is a murky notion in itself, you know, issues of taste, issues of income, you know, these are the things that you can actually put a foothold on. So when I look at my intake year on year, we've got 11 different eligibility criteria. 75% of our young people tick at least 2 of those. And actually you're talking about what is the practical barriers here. You know, you have to have the right tastes to get on, you know, you have to know the canon, you have to know the codes, and you have to be able to pursue these careers. And they're really hard careers to get into, even for the poshest of people that have the most independent income. And we talk about working class, and like Matthew mentioning the benefits class, we don't talk about upper class. Suddenly everyone else is middle class, you know, but the people at the top, there's a rarefied group with a very fixed set of tastes, and they do hold the keys to power in these industries and beyond. So I suppose Yeah, I also struggle with the idea of class per se as a firm barrier.
Yeah, we're also not really. I think it's by design, isn't it? There's a very clear reason that the one thing that, as Matthew says, would shake the top of the pyramid is class, is social economic background. So it's not a protected characteristic. That feels like it's by design. You know, it feels like, because the way the arts are treated in this country, that they're part of the establishment. You know, they're the plaything of the establishment. And if you're wealthy, then that's an option before you go and do a proper career, a serious career. So I think it's designed to keep us out. We're not meant to be playing in their playground.
Well, if you start making economics, you know, your income, your family income, a basic criteria for being a protected characteristic, you've got to start paying people, you know, at the end of the day. And that's problematic for arts organisations, more so now than it was a year ago, you know, and that's something I've been watching with people 10, 20 years younger than me now coming into these sectors. And there's no point pulling punches on that, I think. I'm with you both.
Yeah. I think we're also talking about opportunities to a world that has been pre-designed, as Matthew's indicated. So I felt that my way to continue to be creative was to come and play at somebody else's party, to somebody else's rules. I didn't get to the cravat stage, but I wasn't far off in terms of going, you know, what are the rules? If I want to be a director and that director looks like that and that director looks like that, what are the rules? But what I should really have been looking at is, where am I? And why do I want to do that play? Or why am I being told that that's the best play for me to do to progress? It seems that Neil's trajectory and his environment are different. And so more and more, I think working class artists have started to think about co-creation, so that the artistic endeavour is not about escape. What I wanted to, I'm like a character out of a Willie Russell book. You know, I wanted to get out. But actually, the people that I really admire are the people that go, there's a way of me exploring who I want to be in my current environment with the people I share the environment with. That seems to me to be a much more radical way of looking at of art for people who currently feel underrepresented.
But that seems to me to absolutely get to the heart of, you know, a lot of things that are actually fundamental problems or issues within the arts, which is who makes art for who, and who is it, and what are those barriers that we keep on talking about that stop people coming and enjoying the arts or having access to careers in the arts. And actually the truth is that quite simply we've erected all those barriers, haven't we, to a large degree, actually really from the end of World War II and the setting up of the Arts Council onwards, which is that when we talk about subsidised theatre, that effectively we talk on the whole about middle class theatre. What we don't talk about is the kind of work that you're talking about, Matthew, about co-creation, about making work with communities, led by people who actually look like and sound like every taxpayer in the country, rather than some kind of an elite. To a large degree, British theatre is elitist.
Yes, it's elitist in terms of the coverage. It's elitist in terms of how it all links up in terms of the establishment. But there is still radical bursts of populism. I think you've talked about this before, Lyn, about Only Fools and Horses. They can't get it. They can't get it out of that theatre in the West End, and I know for a fact that people hate the fact they can't get that play out of that theatre in that West End, because other people want to go and do the sort of plays they like. Yeah. So and if you look at somewhere like Northampton is really interesting. So you've got the Royal and the Derngate, and if I've got this the right way around, the Royal is the nice Victorian theatre that does a certain kind of work for a certain kind of audience. They struggle to get people in. Next door at the Derngate, where there's like 1 million seats, if it's, I don't know, a tribute band. I've been in there. It's just you. When I directed at the Royal, I was thinking, oh my God, I hope all these people are coming to see my show, and then they walk past me to go and see a Michael Jackson tribute. You know what I mean? It's we make it elitist by what we prioritize, I think, because that the establishment works through education, it works through the arts organisations, and it absolutely works through the media as well in terms of what they give print space to.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, I think kind of we're being quite good about identifying what the issues are and what the problems are. What I'm interested in is what would it be that would genuinely shift the power? You know, as you say, Matthew, you don't want to talk about more opportunity for people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. You want working class people to have power within the arts. How do we do that? What fundamentally has to change?
Governance.
Sorry?
Governance. Change.
Okay.
Yeah. I was having a conversation today and I was going, why is the former CEO of BP the true leader of that theatre? Why is the head of marketing in Amazon the true leader of that theatre? You know, they employ the artistic leaders and often other members of the senior team. And that's where the power is in any organisation. But I think if you look around at those boards, because of the very nature of boards, that they're a voluntary contribution, you know, it's something that you do with your free time, that you had to have accrued some kind of social capital and some cultural capital and probably a bit of wealth and some time. And you have to have been interested in the arts in the first place to know what a board is and how it works. So again, it's a kind of elitism in terms of who it's excluding from those rooms. And I think if you look at boards where serious shifts have happened, like Contact Theatre in Manchester, for example, you see the art is different, you see the audience is different, you see that the atmosphere and the vibe and the ethos of the space is different. So I think it really is. And if we're talking about power, that's where the power is kind of centered, isn't it? At the top. So it's how do you change the nature of that power and push it down and through.
Same for Battersea Arts Centre, as you mentioned in the preamble. Then it's vital, and you have to remove the volunteerism, because I mean, take my organisation. I've got an amazing team. For 10 years, we've been pushing the boundary on this issue. You know, none of us have been invited to more than one board. No one's interested. You know, you do have to have that capital, all forms of that capital, to take part there. And you have to bring a bit of money with you, and you have to know, it's a real problem. It's a big one to change. And you can also go down the path of saying, well, what are these major cultural organisations actually for? What is their mission? Why is representative art in all its forms a matter for charity? You know, for the majority to be represented. There's so many big questions. I think the practical steps are exactly that. Appoint people from the community, pay them to do it, and look at your mission and look at your curatorial and commissioning practices in the first instance, and change it from the top, because there's a lot of people working from the bottom to change things. You know, we kind of got out of the traps earlier. Arts Emergency 10, 11 years ago, that space is filled now with so many interesting approaches to getting people in and keeping them in. But you've got to change the top, otherwise you are fighting a losing battle, in my opinion. You know,
I think so. I can't think of anywhere else to start other than governance. And I think what's really difficult is it's very hard to get leaders of arts organisations to talk about this and embrace this, because their boards are often their employers. So it's quite hard to get the I've tried. It's quite hard to get a sort of industry-wide conversation going about this. I think boards need to publicly rebuild, so that they're accountable publicly. And I think that the first place they need to start is a combination of their artists and their communities, which also probably make up the third element, which would be their audience, if it's a performative organisation. I think that's really important. But I do think there's something else, which is a kind of cultural assembly. And that might be in a local authority. So Bradford have done a lot of work with this. And I think Sheffield have been doing this work. So that's not organisation specific. So it's attached to or set up by the local authority, and it's democratic, and people will be invited to join. And there will be wider social discussions about what the cultural capital of the whole locality should be. And it seems to me, if you've got this kind of wide pool operating on one level, and then new peaks of democracy on top of organisations as well, you have a very you've got a better chance of change. It's impossible, but really exciting to then say what the organisation will look like. And it's not for us to guess the model, because if we let them do it, then it will be democracy in action, and who knows what they'll come up with.
My question to you three is how does money play into this? Again, if you go back to the idea of the Arts Council post 1945, and that effectively it was middle class taste that predominated, and therefore it was middle class taste that was actually subsidized and received money. But carrying that on to what you're talking about, Matthew, I mean, you know, money clearly plays a part, and we know that it does, because going back right at the beginning of this discussion, it's about the fact that opportunities don't exist if in fact actually you don't have those safety nets, if you can't actually intern for very, very little money or do a number of very, very low paid jobs. So, but again, what I'm interested in is how do you, not just that we need the money to be directed in different directions, how do we make it directed into different places?
Well, I don't think we're arguing against. I don't think we're arguing against funding for a particular organisation. We're not. That would be very interesting if an organisation was to democratise and the Arts Council response to that was to take their funding away. Then we'd be having a really interesting conversation.
Can I just say, I suppose part of my thinking was perhaps the other way round, which is that if we are going to accept that quite simply the industry and that the arts are not really prepared to have the conversation, as Matthew was kind of suggesting, then might it not be the case that in fact, that rather than trying to bring about change within those institutions, that you just turn around and say, well, let's change it via funding, which is that we put the funding actually directly into the communities and into the grassroots, and then the institutions will have to follow the funding, or in fact they would just cease to exist. Is that too right?
They could happily be funded by their billionaire philanthropists, couldn't they, and carry on like museum exhibits, carrying on with the same kind of content. In an ideal world, what you'd have if you wanted more artists, more people to be able to engage with the arts, is free higher education and a universal basic income, because you're talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs here, aren't you? You want to get to the top, self-actualization, you need security and safety and all those things. Most people in our society don't have that. So the fact that the arts looks like it isn't just, you know, it's not just a case of like whipping the people in the arts so you should all feel guilty, because I think most people do feel guilty in the arts. I don't think you can be an expressive human and having that kind of platform and those skills without having that sense of guilt. But like, there's so many things to address in society if you want to really fix it. But practically, yeah, putting the money at the very least in artists' hands, not organizations' hands. You know, so at least there is a sense of agency without working within the parameters that are dictated by these organizations, which we've accepted are unlikely to change in the near future and are problematic in terms of how they're governed.
Neil, why just into the artists' hands? Why not into the community's hands? Because that seems to me that in some ways that's one of the arguments that we've been talking about anyway, which is that art and people who work in the arts are, and of course what we've seen of the last year in the pandemic, with very good reasons, want to help to protect artists, why not just give it directly to communities?
Well, there are people that have argued for that. Oh, sorry, Neil, go on. The question
No,
was...
I was going to say, like, what's the difference between the two, I suppose, just because I'm lucky to work with best part of 10,000 artists, and they're all people who are, are not, you know, like not, I'm not thinking of like David Hare, you know, not to single him out or whatever, but.
I mean, I went on an interesting journey just personally last year because as I said, my route was the cravat route, trying to assimilate and how far can I get in this on this journey that has been put in front of me, somebody else's journey perhaps. And then the pandemic gave me a real opportunity to think. And I did a podcast called Culture Plan B with David Jubb. And it was genuinely for me, I produced it so that I could be educated. And each week the sort of scales fell away from when Conrad Murray said, you should give the money to us. Buildings should only be funded enough to be healthy support mechanisms. The rest of the funding, all the project funding, all the creative funding should go directly to the artists. And then essentially the buildings have to pitch to the artist to get that great work in their building. And I thought that's as radical as it can get. It's brilliant. And then about 2 weeks later, we interviewed Saad Dean said from Home in Slough. And he said a version of what you're saying, Lyn, that every member of the population should be given a cultural grant, even if it's only £50. And in things like cultural assemblies, they decide where that money is spent and how it's spent within their community. Of course, people are terrified of that because they don't want Michael Jackson tribute. But it's absolute elitism not to release those funds widely to either artists and or communities, I think.
Matthew.
Oh, well, it was just, I remember, and I'll keep everyone anonymous to protect the innocent. A theatre doing a big public campaign around letting you, the audience, programme our theatre. The results came in. The senior leadership didn't like the results. The results were fixed.
Theatre face.
Yeah, what everybody wanted was pantomime, musical. And well, one, we can't afford to do that, but two, we don't want to do that.
And it's interesting though, isn't it? They're only choosing things off the menu that the middle class institution has provided. They've just done one big thing every Christmas that's attracted people. Whereas actually, if you're working within a community, as an artist within a community, so much more is revealed about their tastes and what they want and what they think of as culture and how they want to express themselves. They're just choosing off they're just choosing the most fun thing off a very limited menu.
Yeah, which brings you to start thinking about what's happened to arts education, you know, over my lifetime. The way that what is a free to find source of great wonder and human experience has been narrowed and cut. You know, that's exactly it. There's not much nutrition out there in elite culture or commercial culture at the moment, you know, broadly speaking. And that's, you know, the arts is in I know I run an organisation called Arts Emergency, but it is in a massive crisis moment. Before the pandemic, it was in a crisis moment in 2010 when I started the charity. And if you look at the Panic Report, which we worked on with Dave, Mark O'Brien, you know, that it was in crisis 30, 40 years ago, you know, when some of us were born. So it's kind of small steps, isn't it? You know, the governance is a real obvious one, and getting behind a lot of the organisations that are proposing different models. You know, the idea of organisations pitching to artists to get them in is very sweet, you know, and it speaks to a healthier dynamic as well if your aim is to produce engaging, vital culture.
Yeah. And also we talked about philanthropists. I mean, I sort of think that if someone's got £1 million and they want to invest in a show, so that's up to them. And then if that's what commercial theatre is, then great, that's fine. I think that if I look at, I don't really want to beat anybody up, but if I look at, say, and again, I'm absolutely back, forgive me, in the world of mainstream theatre. If I look at the Bridge that doesn't receive funding, if I look at the Old Vic that doesn't receive funding, if I look at the National Theatre which does receive funding, I'm going, why are those three institutions offering me, to me, what feels like the same stuff? Yeah. And one of them gets 15 million a year. And then, so I feel the place where our money is going needs to take much, much more responsibility to broaden their reach and to offer us a different menu, because other people are doing their stuff just as well as them now, and it's not costing us a penny.
Yeah.
There's something about
I was
going to say, there's something about taste again, isn't there, in that? Just thinking about all the plays that I saw that I absolutely hated or was forced to read, or the kind of, to my 11, 12-year-old brain, the interminable Shakespeare text that we were asked to kind of plough through in a fairly dull way in GCSE English. And then I went and saw Tunde Kolai's Scrape Off the Black. And I went, pow, wow. Who knew that could do that to me? Who knew that I could receive such profound meaning from a piece of theatre? But that, again, that's about taste, and that's about who's programming, who's making these choices about, you know, have your culture, it's good for you, kind of thing.
And the things that were power for me, Matthew, I'm almost embarrassed to say what they were. It was as a 16-year-old, when I saw Bouncers at the Oldham Coliseum, couldn't believe it. The level of creativity involved in these four men telling me all these stories. You ain't going to see that at the National Theatre. And then, you know, the power moments for other people that we work with, that are our peers, they get to reproduce their power moment because it fits into that model of taste. Yeah.
So, okay, tell me, just going back to earlier, I think it was Neil that you were talking, Neil Griffiths, I think that you were mentioning about that idea about what we think is culture. And I remember doing an interview with Rebecca Atkinson-Lord a few years ago, and she said something which has kind of stuck with me. She said, we as a broadly middle-class arts community don't really want working class people to engage with the arts on their own terms. We want them to engage with the arts in order to make them more like us. We want them to learn to be quiet and observe the social rules around behaviour and dress. We want them to engage in intellectual high art that speaks to the traditional ideas of the upper classes, in the hope that through some bright lights and pretty costumes, we'll be able to trick them into bettering themselves. I mean, it sounds as though kind of that...
Did you just say that? Did you just say that?
I was interviewing her and we were talking, it was an interview about class, and actually she's very interesting because she's a very good example about that idea of passing somebody who came from a working class background and actually has a great show called The Class Project, which is about what happened to her by being getting a scholarship to a private school, and how she doesn't really belong kind of with the people she went to school with, but she no longer really belongs to her family.
I mean, that's like being mixed race, isn't it? I recognise that experience, but through ethnicity.
That's so interesting. But that strikes me that one of the things altogether about this conversation and what we're talking about tonight is actually about where those intersections are. I mean, Neil Griffiths, you were talking about, and we sort of, I sort of dropped that ball, which was about arts education. I mean, you know, where is it? I mean, God, years and years ago, Richard Eyre was talking about, you know, cultural apartheid, and about the fact that actually, you know, in state schools, you don't have education, and you know, and the EBAC and all those things being dropped. And of course, this week we've had the news about 50%. I mean,
specialist subjects,
specialist subjects and arts subjects using 50% in arts education. That is going to be devastating. Yeah,
it comes down to what Matt said about power moments. You know, what is a power moment? Culture is dangerous. It's that moment that you realise, you know, that you have this kind of power, that you have these connections. And yeah, arts education, it's a really hard one to talk about because you know, Arts Emergency was founded when the fees tripled. We were just disgusted, Josie Long and I, who I founded it with, because we paid to go and we struggled to pay and equivocated about what to study. So what's happened over the last 10 years has been nothing short of a tragedy, and it's a narrowing of horizons, and it's a the Powell moments risk becoming less frequent for those of us that don't have the privilege. The arts are meant to teach you to look out of the window. That's my stance. You know, that's what they exist for fundamentally in my mind. And to cut arts education, to narrow the canons in education and what's commissioned in major theatres and on the major platforms is exactly that. It's a smaller window. And yeah, I mean,
but okay, again, but what do we do? How do the arts, and you know, we've talked about governance, we've talked about changes to funding, but maybe one of the ways to actually benefit everybody at this is about properly aligning, and actually about the arts being campaigning. It seems to me even this week, with the news about kind of on social media, with the news about, you know, the cuts, it's kind of like, I don't know, it sort of strikes me, it's just like, yeah, everybody has got to do something by the 6th of May and reply to this. But actually, nobody is really completely and utterly outraged. Nobody is kind of saying, you know, how do we absolutely, as art, try and shift and change this government thinking? Instead, actually, we spend all our time going cap in hand to the government and saying kind of, please save us, please give us some money. And actually, they've showed their contempt in every way.
Yeah, I mean, just, I won't hold the platform here, but just to say, when we started Arts Emergency, we were very clear that economics and going cap in hand, that's, you know, you don't attack the enemy with their own weapon, because you will always lose. You know, the master's tools won't bring down the master's house and all those things. And for me, I'm 40 now, and I've been an activist for 20 years, right? Organising in all variety of causes. And I'm suddenly now watching the next generation learning the same lessons I learned 10, 15 years ago. And I'm realising it's a long haul thing, you know, changing these. So my focus at Arts Emergency is on the human scale, people to people. It is the best part of 10,000 people that are part of our charity, and they are people at all levels of industry. We have gatekeepers and influencers and celebrities and so forth, but those that mentor our 16-year-old applicants are people that are in their early and middle careers, that are struggling to stay in right now, that were struggling before. And that for me feels like, obviously I've invested everything in it for the last 10 years, but that network of peers, that place to go to ask questions, when Matthew, you talk about Stratford East, and you know, we're trying to do that at scale in a way that doesn't go cap in hand to anyone apart from the individuals that fund us, and we are fully focused on the myriad interests of the young people that are having Powell moments throughout a year. They're not on a train track. We're not vocationalizing the arts. It's your theatre, your set design, your photography, your academia. It is just a big menagerie of people with all the safeguards and policies that are required in light of recent events, you know, obviously, to make it a safe and fruitful environment for people to just try and flourish and support each other in. And that just feels like as small as it is, over time, hopefully these things do start to have an impact.
I think it's hard, isn't it? Because there are not enough people like Neil working in that way or within communities that can motivate those communities and alert them to how dangerous it is that this stuff is being taken away. What happens is people that have benefited from it are now in an elitist position. We're the ones who are trying to sort of pitch down and go, this is a disaster. This is terrible. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that we're saying, why aren't we angry? But why aren't the communities, the schools that it's directly affecting, angry? I think that's really worth looking at. We only have to look at 2 weeks ago, that the mass movement against the notion of forming a European Super League that really, really, really felt to people that it was affecting their lives, that they would lose something. And we're not, art and culture isn't competing with that on any level, which is a tragedy.
But is that the disconnect? I remember, the kind of middle of last year, maybe, people started to talk about striking, and particularly trying to affect kind of broadcast level striking, movies, Netflix, BBC, ITV, Amazon, those big platforms. And well, actually, if people just pulled all of the content from there, there'd be more of an understanding of where it comes from, that it does require us, Michaela Cole, Sam Mendes, whoever, but there's a through line between grassroots to theatres to film and TV.
Massive. And they cut the roots off 10 years ago, if not before. That's exactly it. And my organisation, as powerful as it now is, it's still small. We're only powerful because we're independent. And, it feels more like a lifeboat at the moment than anything else, especially with lockdown. Seeing the impact we have, it's not anger that we feel. It's not anger that the young people and their teachers feel. It's sadness, because it's a slow dissipation of that profound passion that you have as a young person that we all did. It's a slow process that slowly you get filtered out.
And if you have that sadness already, and then what might be seen as the kind of way out. So as Neil said, a kind of you're doing an English language degree. If that way out comes with a £50,000, £70,000 debt attached to it, then there's no way out. There's no way out.
And we shouldn't need a way out either, should we?
No, exactly.
It should be, it should be, we should all have lives worth living, futures worth working for,
Well, that's it. We're all still addicted to the kind of escape mentality when it comes to culture.
Yeah. I think also on the part of teachers a lot, I think it's also about exhaustion. I think it's, it is sadness, but it is also about, and I think for young people, it's about the fact that if you've never had something, you sort of don't know what it is that actually, there is something that you could grasp for, or a bigger window, but actually you can't find it. And it seems to me that is all tied in with many other cuts, from Sure Start centres to cuts to libraries. Certainly for me growing up, a library was a lifesaver.
I was just going to say, to be positive, you look at the organising of young people. We have a youth collective at Arts Emergency. There are 3 or 4 campaigns that those young women are involved in that are powerful. Look at the organising at Pimlico Academy the other week. Like, people aren't passive. We're not passive anymore. This generation, I'm lucky to work with a lot of hope, because I see such strength.
They are cultural entrepreneurs. And I remember hearing something from the woman who runs Beat Freaks that just seemed to me to be so extraordinary in how young people are helping each other, when she said, build things that build other things. And that is how to quickly feed your energies and your creativity back into your immediate environment. Build opportunities that are going to create opportunities for the people around you is brilliant.
Listen, I'm really pleased, because it seemed to me that actually, oh gosh, the hordes are descending of small children. But that actually we've now taken a slightly more optimistic turn. Neil, with what you're saying absolutely brilliantly about young people, who I think many of them are activists. Matthew, about that idea of build things so that other people can build things. Matthew Xia, do you have an optimistic note on which we can bring this to a close?
Gosh, I wish I did. I've become more cynical in the last year.
No pressure.
Yeah, no pressure for the beat of optimism. Gosh, I feel like I'm hopeful. I remain hopeful, because as an artistic leader who comes from an impoverished background, I feel like I can lead by example, and I can turn the company that I run into a case study, I think, of how to make work in better ways, that is more inclusive. But I think that's it. So I'm just aware of my own stock and what I can do with it at this point in time. And I hope that people can look at that and go, well, if it can be done in that way there, why don't we try that?
Listen, thank you very much, all three of you. I found this really interesting. I think actually in many ways the fact that the jumping off point has been class and it's been behind, but I think the fact that actually that the conversation has broadened perhaps to that idea that everything is connected, I think has been really, really useful. I think, you know, too often in theatre we have conversations where we moan about how things are and actually cannot imagine how things might be different. So I hope for everybody who's been here this evening that this has been an opportunity to go away and think how we all individually can make things different. And now I'm going to hand you back to Ria.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lyn, Matthew, Neil. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you so much for your brilliant words. Also, a huge thank you to our virtual audience for sharing your time with us this evening. Please do check out the Alchemy programme, which is online at www.thenorthwall.com. And if you'd like to join us for our next couple of panels tomorrow, we have Chris Nelson from Lift sharing a discussion around theatre without borders towards an international theatre. And on Friday, we have the wonderful Emma Rice from Wise Children sharing a discussion around the future of British theatre. Until then, thank you so much again to our wonderful guests, Lyn Gardner, Matthew Dunster, Matthew Xia, Neil Griffiths. Have a lovely rest of your evening, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.